Welcome to Daraja Press Podcasts. I'm Firoz Manji. On this episode, we speak with Kirk J. James, author of 94A 6325.
And, I remember reading George Jackson and reading Fanon, and these were the stories that really helped me to see myself, really helped me to see my situation in a broader context. Because at 18 years old, when you're going through this, it's like, my God, woe me, why is this happening to me? I began to realize that this wasn't just me, but this was the Black experience. This was the American experience for so many men of color.
Coming of age in the era of mass incarceration. This is part 2 of a 3-part interview with Kirk J. James. It's an honor to have you on the show, dear Jay. Daraja Press will be publishing your outstanding book shortly. I would also like to introduce you to our 2 co-editors, Ayo Ogunremi and Russell Lamy, who are going to discuss your life, your book, and our journey together. Welcome, Ayo. Welcome, Russell.
Thanks, Rose. Hello. Great to be here.
Thank you. And thank you for that incredible introduction.
You're welcome. Since you've taken the guilty plea at this point, August, September, right in Rikers, and then you get transferred to downstate and then to the CAT, right? And It's in the CAT that you meet Pops, who introduces you to a bunch of revolutionary figures and their writings. So can you tell us about your early time at the CAT and say Pops and the rest of the community that you found there?
So kind of even coming upstate, right? I just had 6 months on Rikers Island. I am maybe a buck 30, I'm 130 pounds. I've just spent 6 months on Rikers Island. I'm stressed. I've lost so much weight. And so I really was in survival mode, right? I think coming upstate, Coxsackie is, historically one of the most violent prisons probably in the world. And just putting that in context, it's a prison where, think about how crazy this sounds. It's an adolescent maximum security prison. So everyone in there is probably between 17 and 20 years old with a minimum of 7 years. And many of those people have 15 to life, 25 to life. So it's, again, there's a sense of hopelessness there amongst young people, some with more time than they've been alive, right? So it's incredibly, again, it's a violent place, but it's not just interpersonal violence, right? It's systemic violence that breeds interpersonal violence. So it's an incredibly violent place. It's an incredibly hopeless place. It's an incredibly dark place. And so getting there, especially after, surviving 6 months on Rikers Island, I really was just in survival mode. But I ultimately, started to develop a plan, knowing that, I may be here for a while. And I signed up for the mess hall. And in the mess hall, in jails and prisons, serves many purposes. But one of them for me was just the ability to be able to access different types of food, because you can't survive on prison food. So, you really have to have a plan of how you're going to eat and survive. And the mess hall is often also one of the better paying jobs. And better paying jobs means that maybe instead of 5 cents, you're getting 25 cents. So let's be clear with that too, right? So I'm in the mess hall. Maybe I'm in Coxsackie now for 2 months. I'm in the mess hall. And the, you'd call them OG, like an old timer, someone who'd been incarcerated for a long time. Pops, locks across from me. And, he was someone I knew from the yard. We'd work out together every once in a while. But then when I get to A1, we're literally locking right across from each other. And he starts to share books with me. And at first, I'm just like, okay, this is cool, but I'm not reading any of this. And we would also work out in the yard, and we'd do pull-ups and stuff like that. And he'd quiz me and be like, hey, did you read this? And I'd be like, I'd fake some excuse why I didn't read it. And then one day he really got upset, and he really began to tell me his story. And I feel like not that I wasn't politicized before, but I think it really opened my eyes. And he told me his own story of being a Black Panther and being targeted by COINTELPRO and ultimately, similar to a lot of Black Panthers in the era, getting a fake conviction, right? And being sent to prison for, at that point, he had 25 years to life, right? For a conviction that he professes innocence. But, Pops, with many people that were in these situations, they became somebody else, right? They could have just been angry, but they weren't angry. They became like teachers, they became, in many ways, they were like prophets to people like myself. And he began to share his story. We began to read together. I began to really take it a little bit more seriously. And, I remember reading George Jackson and reading Fanon, and these were the stories that really helped me to see myself, really helped me to see my situation in a broader context. Because at 18 years old, when you're going through this, it's like, my God, woe me, why is this happening to me? And as I began to spend time with Pops, as I began to read and to really think about these things historically, I began to realize that this wasn't just me, but this was the Black experience. This was the American experience for so many men of color. And that really began to push me to think about what my role would be, What would be my role if I had an opportunity to get out of prison, And those were questions that became really salient to me. And in some points, I didn't believe I was going to get out of prison. He thought I was going to get out of prison. Other people thought I was going to get out of prison. But I really started to, like, to really think about that. What would I, if I was reading this and I felt like the rage and also the accountability, right? Like I felt the accountability to also be able to speak up and challenge these systems. Like, what was I going to do? So Pops was incredibly helpful in not only raising like my political consciousness, but really like pushing me to think about like my accountability towards dismantling systems of oppression, right? Like that my freedom wasn't just me getting out of prison, right? And I remember we'd always talk about James Baldwin's letter to Angela Davis. And, he's like, hey, I may not really agree with everything you do in all your practices, but I'm really clear that, if they come for you in the morning, they'll surely come for me at night. And, really thinking about this intersectional approach to liberation and, these are like the tools that drive me to this day, just really seeing that, none of us can be free unless we're all free. So, those first months in Coxsackie were like really powerful, spending time with Pops in terms of building like my political consciousness. But he was also teaching me how to take care of my body, right? Like we're going to the yard, we're working out in some ways, this was like a very holistic, revolutionary program, right? Because I think, especially now, there's so much more understanding of trauma and how the body keeps score. And, like imagine in a place like jail and prison. So it was one thing that I was being politically conscious, but then it was another thing for me to also like be taking care of my body, right? Be attuned with my body, to be going to the yard, to be building discipline, things obviously that allowed me to be like my best self, right? And tools that would allow me to survive again, like a very dangerous, violent environment. So, I look at those months in Coxsackie as just really, I was so blessed to have like a mentor like Pop who not only raised my consciousness, but really, shaped me as well too, right? Like you're going to work out, you go to like lift weights, you go to build muscle, you're going to really learn how to survive.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think the value of Pops' mentorship really comes through, and like especially in the context of you're adjusting to this system, you're losing so much hope. And one thing that you write that Pop says that really stuck with me is this idea that the importance of doing time and not having time do you. So
Yeah.
for someone who's just in the system and is being faced with this sense of hopelessness, like how did that land for you? How important was that for you to hear that from Pops?
Yeah, I mean, that was powerful because, like you can feel so hopeless, right? Like again, you don't know when the door is going to open. So what's the motivation? What's the motivation for anything? especially when you're looking at, I got arrested in 94, got convicted in 94. What we're talking about now isn't even a year later, right? So this is not even a year into a 7 to life bid, right? So many people would feel so hopeless. There's, depression sets in, and I had periods of significant depression, right? But just to have someone to say that, like, hey, you have to use this time, right? Like, you have to see this time as an opportunity. You have to see this time as an opportunity to build your mind, to build your body, to build your spirit. That was a gift, right? That was a gift for me. And like, again, I can't even tell you, because so many people try to sleep away a bit, like you sleep away a bit. I felt like I became a voracious reader, like I would read maybe like 3 books a week, like, and this, if I look at my life today, in many ways, I was prepared myself, but I didn't know that. And that was, again, pops, right? Just saying that, like, hey, you don't know where you're going, but you have to prepare yourself, right? And so, like, not having time do you and you doing time was really that, like, really, I'm not gonna sit in my cell and be in despair, right? I'm gonna read, I'm gonna think about theories, and does this theory work? Why doesn't it work? I'm gonna read George Jackson and understand, how he felt like, we should heal, and I'm gonna read Asada and think about, like, how do we build community? I often say this was like maybe my first doctorate, like it really was the place where I really began to learn to study and to think critically. And it was really because of that again, right? Like, I was with Pops from like maybe 5 months, right? I met him probably like October when I got to the cat, but really we lived together on the mess hall block from probably January to May, right? So in like 5 months, was really, and in my infancy too, right? I just came upstate, so to have someone like that to really be a mentor and to really, who had like at that point already like 15 years or something like that and it survived like, immense carnage in those spaces and understood it better than most, right? Like, to have a mentor like that, was just really, it was a godsend. And I feel like, as you know, in the book, I would have other mentors too, similarly, that were just like really godsends. And I think one of the things too that, and I'm happy that you brought up Pops, right, is that some of the people that society has labeled monsters are like the people that, are some of the most incredible human beings, and I think that gets lost, right? That like everyone in jail is this monster, or they've committed a murder, or they committed this. And I can tell you without doubt that, for someone who themselves doesn't know if they will ever go home and probably will never go home, right? And for them to see in you possibility and for them to invest in you, right? That is like a greatest form of love. Love in a way that is non-reciprocal, like there is no, you're really investing in your values and your ideas of like liberation and hoping that, that I can really embody and live that out. That hasn't been lost on me, the level of investment that I've received from so many people. And it puts maybe even a degree of pressure on me because like I feel, I've often said that this isn't my story, even though, it is my story, it's not my story, it's our story. I really wanted this book to be written for every human being who has been marginalized, who's been a number, who's not been seen. Those early years and those mentors, are people that I take with me everywhere I go. And I hope that my work will always forever be honoring of them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just one last thing about Pops, because I think it's really important to mention, to just show like how incredible of a figure he is. So like you just said, he had already gone 15 years in prison. And it was at that point, that same year in 94, that you met him, that his other co-defendants who took the plea got out. Like, if he had taken the plea instead of going to trial, he would have gone out the year that he met you, but he still had another
Wild.
15, something like 15 years to go.
And
10 years.
I think he had another 10. Yeah.
He still has like the strength of mind or whatever to
Yeah.
approach you with this perspective, and is capable of like seeing so much potential in you and seeing also his responsibility to you. I just think he's really incredible. Like he's such an inspiring figure.
I'm getting a little emotional. Thank you for putting it that way. But yeah, no, definitely, man. I can't speak enough, you know, like I can't praise enough. I don't even have words, but like it's even yesterday was my comrade Bliss's birthday, you know, who is a big part of the story as well too. And I just legitimately feel, you know, jail and prison is such a horrible place. And I've met so many incredible people in that darkness that really, I couldn't be me without them, right? So I have so much gratitude. And this is why I feel like I go so hard, you know, because I know again that many of my comrades are still incarcerated, whether it's in jail or prison, they've been deported, or you know they're back in communities with like no access because they're formerly incarcerated. I have a friend that's in immigration detention as we speak. I have a friend who died in prison a few months ago. You know, so these aren't even things that like have stopped, right? Like these are things that are still like happening right now. So I feel like the only way that I can truly honor there's so many people who have like again like poured into me so I could be me right now is to really like not only tell my story but really tell the story of what this carceral genocide really is.
You're listening to the Daraja Press podcast. Daraja is the Kiswahili word for bridge. As its name suggests, Daraja Press seeks to build bridges, especially bridges of solidarity between and amongst movements, intellectuals, and those engaged in struggles for a just world. Check out our other episodes, books, and more at darajapress.com. So now let's get back to the show.
Picking up on the line of the people you met, like you end up spending about a year and a half in the CAP before transferring across the street to the medium security prison, Greene. So it's at Greene that you meet some important figures like the aforementioned Bliss. So maybe you could tell us a little bit more about Bliss or the other people you met at Greene.
Yeah. Greene was just incredible, right? Like I was in CAT from October 94 to maybe like June 95. And then I was in Greene from June 95 to December 98. So it's like 3.5 years, right? So I really, you know, the CAT was like, I look at the CAT was like maybe I was being prepared for being upstate, right? And then Greene was where I was really going to put these things into practice because Greene, similar to the CAT, was a medium security adolescent prison. So again, right, you're talking about these young kids that are, and I was a young kid myself, right? But like, you know, with significant amount of prison time, significant amount of trauma, right? That are experiencing significant amount of violence. So it again, it creates this very combustible, hostile place. And so I remember getting to Greene and, you know, like going from a maximum to a medium security prison is a benefit, right? In some ways, because you have like greater movement, you have greater freedom. And so when I got to Greene, they mandate you take certain programs. So one of the programs that I needed to take was called ASAC, Alcohol Substance Abuse Treatment Program. And in that program was where I met Bliss. And I met Bliss because of another friend, Ron Du, who I knew from Coxsackie. We worked together in the mess hall. And he and Bliss were from the same neighborhood in Queens, an infamous neighborhood in Queens. And so through Rondo, I would become to know Bliss. Bliss was about 10 years my senior. He was an Army veteran and also a revolutionary, right? But also someone who loved guns and you know, like really struggled with street life, right? So he was a full human being in the spectrum. But Bliss would become, you know, probably I feel God really blessed me with Bliss because Bliss, out of the 9 years that I'd be incarcerated, I would spend almost 8 of those years with Bliss in different prisons, etc. And Bliss would become like my big brother. Bliss would become like my mentor. And I have so many stories with Bliss, but I'll share something, right? And in 1996, Bliss ran a lot of like programming in Greene. So he ran like transitional services, and he was like a really great speaker. And we were starting this, he started this program called YAP, Youth Assistance Program. And what the program was going to be was we were going to bring young people into the prison, and we would share our stories with them, as a way of hopefully keeping them out of prison. Many of them had been arrested and gotten in trouble with the law. So it was kind of like a scared straight, but we weren't going to scare them. We were going to just more like share our story. So I remember, Bliss asked me to be a part of this. And I was like, I couldn't even phantom my story helping someone else. I couldn't even conceptualize that. I couldn't even conceive my story helping someone else. And Bliss ultimately, because I had such a love and admiration for him, ultimately convinced me that it would be a good program for me to be a part of. And this really changed my life. I remember, just being in community with these young children, and they were children like 12, 13, 14, right? This is what we do. We arrest kids and just really speaking to them about their own lives, speaking to them about, my own story. And, there was just such commonality, and I felt so connected to them. And I remember leaving that first day and just being like, "Oh my God, this is what I want to do." But it was also so heavy, like just really being in space, and you're sharing so much trauma, you're sharing so much like violence. It was really heavy. And I remember just seeing Bliss in that space, the way he operated, the way he spoke, the realness in which he spoke, but also the way he commanded a room. And in many ways, this became, like, my God, this is who I want to be. I want to be like Bliss. I want to be able to talk to people and people listen. I want to be able to share my story, and my story helps people, right? So again, like Bliss was really, creating a pathway similar to Pops, where I would begin to learn how to share my story, see the power in my story, begin to think about how I can, engage in my story as a storyteller, right? So I look at some of these things, and I'm so grateful again that Pops again, right? Doing time, not having time doing you. Like I was really doing these things that were in many ways like preparing me for a future that I didn't even know awaited me. But Bliss was so instrumental in that. I think about, my role in the academy today. And there's no way that that would have happened without Bliss. So much of, again, of my ability to even see power and purpose in my story comes from my time and experience with Bliss.
So it's also in your time in Greene where you get your deportation order. So how does that happen? What's the context, both politically in terms of like the laws that have been passed to make that such, and what's your reaction?
Yeah. So in context, right? So when I got locked up in 1994, and because I was sentenced to a nonviolent crime, criminal possession of a controlled substance in second, I knew that there was always a possibility of immigration repercussions, but because of, again, the crime that I was convicted of, I knew there would probably be a strong likelihood that, I wouldn't be impacted. Fast forward 1996. So these laws, again, right, they're all happening at a very, at the time that is feeding mass incarceration. So 1994, you have the 1994 crime bill, which kind of, again, like creates this large policies and procedures that like impact, incarceration rates. In 1996, now you pass new immigration laws. And not only do you pass these new immigration laws, you make them retroactive, right? So you make them retroactive. So for all the people that are being impacted now under, the crime bill and these toughened crime policies, they're now subjected to, if they have an immigration status, they're now like myself, subject to deportation. And so I didn't even know about the 1996 immigration laws. And so I remember this is probably like maybe summer of 1996. Every once in a while, you get what's called legal mail, and I was working on different things. So, and I was always just optimistic too, right? That somehow maybe a judge was going to review my folder and say, hey, something's wrong. Let me, here's a letter. we're going to do something, right? So whenever I got like legal mail that I didn't expect, there was always a level of optimism, like somebody's going to like see me, right? Like, because there's no way in my mind, I thought that I was going to do 7 years, right? No way. I was like, this is impossible. So there was always some level of optimism. I need to put that in context, right? So like I'm going to get legal mail now, and Bliss was with me as well too because he had legal mail that night. And I remember him asking me like, "Hey, what do you think it is?" And I was just like, "Yeah, maybe they reform the Rockefeller drug laws. I'm going to get out of prison, blah blah blah." And so I remember like, you go to the law library, then there's a queue. So you wait, you get the letter, and I remember just like staring at the letter because you know, I'm already like serving 7 years to life, and I'm like, it can't get any worse, right? This is end game, right? This can't get any worse. I'm serving 7 years to life. Everyone refuses to see me. I'm in some of the most violent prisons in probably the world. And now I'm looking at this letter, and this letter is saying that there's a warrant for my arrest and I have an order of deportation. And I remember just being like, just I don't have the words even now to tell you of just like how horrible this felt, right? Like again, it just compounded a situation that I didn't think could get any worse. So when I got that letter and I began to then do some research and found out about the 96 immigration laws, and the thing about the 96 immigration laws was that there was no relief, like it was mandatory deportation. So crimes that, they had this term called aggravated felonies, right? So like certain crimes, like, like threshold of crimes are automatically deported. So they expanded that category. So essentially like everything became an aggravated felony, right? So everything was like deportable. So I pretty soon realized that I didn't have any relief. And sure enough, when I saw the judge twice. I would see the judge in the end of 96 immigration judge, and it was more of a formality, him telling me the charges and, that I would need a lawyer or if I wanted a lawyer for the next hearing, but basically told me that he was going to deport me the next hearing, right? And I was just like, so why do I need a lawyer if you're going to deport me? But it's just these are charades, right? It's all a charade. So, in January, I believe January, February 1997, I'm ordered deported. And, that was like, again, it was terrific, right? Because now I'm 3 years into a 7 to life sentence, but now I have an order of deportation. I don't want to say it was a good thing, right? But then at the same point, so and again, this is how the system works, right? Because now there are, the 1996 immigration laws, they pass this maritime parole board for deportation. So now I'm eligible for a parole board for deportation, so I'm like, "Oh my god." So there's a possibility not only and this happens really quickly, right? So I go from thinking, "Okay, I have this sentence to do," to now having an order of deportation, to now, like, in a matter of months, going to a parole board with the idea that if I'm released, that they would deport me. It's like a mixed bag, right? There's definitely I don't wanna be deported, right? Obviously, that is terrifying for me, the prospect of deported, but I also want to get out of prison. Like, I want to get out of prison. If they said to me like, "Hey, we're gonna send you to Africa," I would be like, "Okay, let's go." I really, like, prison is a horrible place, right? Like, to pay, so I need to put that in context, and so after a while, I'm like, "Okay, being deported, I am going to be away from my daughter. I'm going to be away from my family. And there's definitely, that's not what I want. But I also know that if I'm going to be able to like be there for my family, I need to be out of prison. After a while, I'm like, okay, this is not the worst thing, right? So I start to prepare for the board for deportation and, kind of feel like this is a no brainer, right? Like I'd never been arrested before. I know the circumstances of my arrest, all the things that I'd done while I had been incarcerated. I had a good disciplinary record. I had done like all my programs, and the reason that I'm actually getting this parole board is because I actually did all the things to qualify for it. So to me, it's like a no brainer. And I remember, going to that parole hearing, and it was just like, as soon as I got in, it was just like we were at war. It's like they were just coming at me. And like I'd experienced the invisibility of the system, right? But like again, no one ever talked to me, right? Like, when you go to courts, it's like they're talking to your lawyers. No one This was the first time I felt like someone talked to me, and the violence in which they spoke to me, right? The lack of curiosity in which they afforded me, right? Like it was just like, wow, like, it just felt and then this is people that are entrusted with your freedom, right? So like it feels like, my god, like are you even going to try to find out who I am? And I think the more that I wanted to create space for critical conversation, in their minds felt like I was shirking accountability. And for them, accountability was simply, I'm guilty, I've done wrong. Like, no mitigating factors, right? Like, I'm guilty, I'm wrong, like, please redeem me, right? And I think because I didn't come in that way, in their minds, they felt that I was shirking accountability, and it just felt like extremely violent and confusing. And I remember leaving that hearing, and I knew, in my heart told me that, oh my God, you're not going home. Like this is not like how people talk to you if you're going home. I left that hearing and I just felt like, it is the worst feeling. I think outside of losing people, I think that being denied parole is probably one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, right? Like, and I think too, in the book, I hope that I can help people to think about what that must feel for somebody, right? Like you've been in prison for 3 years, and here's an opportunity for you to get out of prison, even if it's for deportation. And people refuse to see you, right? Like
Mm.
it is so like a violent thing, and then to be denied, and you have to live with that. You begin to question yourself. Did I do something? Could I have done more? Could I have said more? You replay the hearing over and over and over. And then you have to tell everybody else, right? Like you have to, explain to your family, your kids, like why, right? Like no one can understand why, because they're like, well, I thought you were doing all these good things. I thought you were doing all these programs. And then you're often denied for, the way the parole board works, you're often denied for the one thing that you can't change. So the parole board shouldn't be considering your crime. That's why you're sentenced. That's why you went through the court process, is so that they could consider the crime, the mitigating factors, and determine your sentence. But the parole board feels empowered, like, oh no, like our job is to do that, right? Versus actually, like, what have I done while I've been incarcerated? Who am I now? What are my plans, when I get out of prison? Those things feel like, oh, no, we want to talk about the one thing that you can't change, which is your crime of conviction. And this is how the parole board, operates, right? Everyone is denied often for their crime of conviction, the one thing you can't change. So again, it creates this feeling of powerlessness, right? Like if I'm going to be, I can't change this. So I have a life sentence. Every time I come to the parole board, you can then deny me from my crime of conviction, because this is the one thing that I can't change.
Mhm.
You were listening to an interview with Kirk J. James, author of 94A 6325, Coming of Age in the Era of Mass Incarceration. It is available at Daraja Press shortly. You can pre-order it now. You can find it along with other important books on our website at darajapress.com. That was part 2 of our 3-part interview. On the next episode of the Daraja Press podcasts, the final chapter of this interview, where Kirk is released from prison and the necessity of abolition becomes clear. This episode was produced by Pierre Loisel, music by Arlo Maverick. I'm Firoz Manji from Daraja Press. Thank you for listening.